What's going on, everyone? It is the Derf, and at long last, I've got a build featuring the new exotic submachine gun, Barrow Dyad. This exotic submachine gun hits like a truck, given the archetype that it is and what you can currently do with it, but we're going to dive right into it. We're going to pair it with a pretty well-known exotic piece of armor, and we're going to use it in a prismatic class that I think will complement it very well. So if you guys have been looking for a way for Warlock to use Barrow Dyad in its unfinished state while still having a ton of fun with it, this is the build for you. Of course, as always, I'll have a dim link in the description for quick access, but if you do find anything helpful in this video, please consider liking and subscribing or sharing with a guardian in need so I can help as many people as possible. Well, let's go, guys. This one's going to be fun.
Yeah, boy!
Prismatic Warlock subclass equipped here. So the basic rule of thumb that I need everyone to understand before we dive any further than what you see right here is that we are going to be utilizing our abilities one after the other. So our main focus is going to be spamming our melee, getting our transcendence up so you can continue to spam your melee, and once you have your super, switch between your transcendence and your super almost interchangeably, one after the other. So the super of choice, with all of that in mind, is going to be whatever you want. I prefer Storm Trance because it is a roaming super, but I have also tested this with Nova Bomb, I've also tested this with Needle Storm, and I've also tested this with Song of Flame. All of these are great options. It's literally whichever one you want, based on whatever you want your Orb of Power to give you. Me personally, with the Storm Trance, I want my Orb of Power to give me Bolt Charge so that I can discharge Bolt Charge at literally any given time randomly to bring more damage down on a group or a single target enemy. So whichever super you choose, that's fine. Just understand what you're going to get from your Orb of Power, which we'll go over here in a second. For the abilities, you can either use the Healing Rift or the Phoenix Dive. I prefer the Burst Glide. We're going to need Arcane Needle because it can stack up to 3 times. And I prefer to have the Storm Grenade on. The reason I prefer to have the Storm Grenade on is it generates the best amount of area damage and has a slightly more easier to achieve base cooldown than, say, the Vortex Grenade. For our aspects, we're going to go with Lightning Surge. When sliding, activate your charge melee ability to blink forward, calling down lightning strikes that jolt targets as you rematerialize. Targets that are hit by your lightning strikes grant you stacks of Bolt Charge. So real quick, if you don't want to have Storm Trance, you are still going to have this as your main way to generate Bolt Charge. Once you generate a single charge of Bolt Charge, you can continue to build on that over and over and over again. So what the play here is being able to get melee energy back as fast as possible. The other reason that Storm Trance makes sense here is every stack of Bolt Charge you get, as you see on the right-hand side of your screen, it grants you melee energy. Because this is going to be a melee-heavy style ability spam, you want to get your melee back as fast as possible. So being able to stack Bolt Charge on top of Bolt Charge with your Orb of Power as well as the Lightning Surge, I think is a win for everyone, and we're going to further compound that once we get to the armor. Feed the Void is going to be our second aspect. Defeating a target with any ability to activate Devour. Your Devour effects are improved, restoring additional health and grenade energy. So regardless of what super you pick, you're still going to be getting your grenade and your health back simply by proccing Devour with one ability, which should not be hard at all once you get used to the playstyle of this. And on top of that, you're going to be extending Devour based on literally anything that you do that kills an enemy, hence going forward. For our fragments, Facet of Purpose is number 1 on the list. Picking up an Orb of Power grants either Bolt Charge, Restoration, Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or Overshield. I would say that the super of choice based on these two, or based on this fragment alone, the two that I would probably recommend the most would either be Restoration or Bolt Charge. Thereby, Storm Trance or Song of Flame. A very, very close third would be the Nova Bomb, simply because of the overshield. Virtually any of those top 3 options on the left-hand side of your screen are going to be great with this style of play that we're going to have, as well as the benefits you get from picking up your Orbs of Power when it comes into relation to any of those top 3. Frost Armor 100% would be the worst one to get, simply because you don't really get anything else from it other than damage resistance. Woven Mail is at least reducing any incoming non-precision damage. So whether that's a Taken that's throwing fire at you, a splash damage situation, or whatever, the Frost Armor, in my opinion, isn't as good as the Woven Mail, simply because it's harder to get more stacks of Frost Armor than it is to just keep Woven Mail procced and giving you that flat buff to damage resistance regardless. Next up, we're going to have Facet of Awakening. Rapidly defeating targets with light or darkness damage or super final blows generates an elemental pickup of the matching damage type. Take your plus 10 resilience here and move on. Facet of Dawn is going to make an appearance here. It doesn't make an appearance in a lot of my builds, but hear me out. Powered melee hits against targets makes you radiant. Powered melee final blows make you and nearby allies radiant. Minus 10 to strength, but don't worry about it. We're not going to be carrying with us a barrier-piercing weapon if we can help it. The way that we counter this is basically because we're going to be using our melee all the time. It doesn't matter if it's the Lightning Surge or the Arcane Needle by itself. Either way, you're going to get a few seconds of radiance. So if you have theoretically 1 melee charge and you come across a barrier champ, activating that melee charge before the barrier pops up will grant you the radiant. Once he pops his barrier, you then can shoot through it with any weapon that you have. Doesn't matter what weapon it is, but we're going to get to that in a second. After you pop that barrier, the champion's going to be stunned, and then you can just whittle it down until you can use your finisher to get rid of the barrier champion. That's how we're going to get around using barrier intrinsically stunning capability weapons. So Facet of Dawn, I don't like the minus 10 to strength, but we're using it to build into our play style, and you'll see that here during the build test. Facet of Balance, rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy. Rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage grants grenade energy. Because we're going to be maining a darkness damage weapon, we're going to be getting absurd amounts of grenade energy back. So the easiest way to counter this is to put on a light energy grenade. I'm not counting on my grenade to really waste any enemies. I'm mainly using it to be able to build the light transcendence bar back. So as long as it's a void or an arc grenade, I'm going to generate melee energy every time I use my grenade. The reason I've got this on here specifically is so I can pair it with the grenade so that I can generate an absurd amount of light damage when I'm using my grenade, or light energy, I should say, while I'm using my grenade, thereby getting me transcendent faster. Last but not least, Facet of Sacrifice. While you have an Arc, Solar, or Void buff, ability final blows grant bonus Darkness Transcendence energy. You don't really need any help getting Darkness Transcendence energy. However, if you are cycling through all of your weapons equally, it could be beneficial to get that, because you may find yourself using the grenade more often than you think, as well as your super more often than you think if you are using Storm Trance like I am, or possibly Song of Flame or Nova Bomb. One thing that I will say, though, is if you're going to swap any of these out, Facet of Dawn can be swapped out as long as you know that you're going to be picking up your Orb of Power. When you pair this with the artifact, it negates the idea that you have to pick up the Orb of Power to get yourself Unraveling rounds, which, since we're going to be using a strand weapon, you would need those to pop barrier champion bubbles. But honestly, having the Facet of Dawn equipped, in my opinion, is going to take less pressure, or take more pressure off of you, giving you less pressure is what I was trying to say, and basically giving you the intrinsic ability to pierce the barrier champions wherever you are without having to worry about if you're generating Orbs of Power. So if you're not very good at generating Orbs of Power, which there are some people out there that that's not their number one focus, which I completely understand. You want to put on other stuff to your armor. This will prevent you from thinking, oh man, I can't use this build unless I have a barrier piercing weapon. No, now you have your melee ability proccing your barrier piercing ability. So it's a win-win for all types of players out there. For armor stat distribution, I recommend speccing into resilience, discipline, and strength in that order. The reason that I'm not telling you to spec into strength second is because we're going to be getting our grenade back so fast that it's not even going to matter. We're going to chuck our grenade at a group of enemies. Any kind of damage that light damage causes is going to give us our grenade back anyways, or sorry, our melee back anyways. So it's going to be kind of an irrelevant situation. We're getting so many grenades back because we're spamming darkness energy weapons that we're going to be able to use our grenade basically to give us our melee back without having to put armor mods on our gauntlets that are going to tie up energy that we're going to use for other things. Keeping keeping intellect and recovery around a T3, T4, T5 is icing on the cake for this. You get a little bit of bump to your super cooldown by doing it like that, and you get a little bit of bump to your class ability regen cooldown by doing it like that. If you were to pick 2 stats out of all 6 options, I would recommend putting on resilience and strength. Put all your energy into that. You do not absolutely have to have anything more than resilience at a T10 to make this build work. You can have your grenade and your melee cooldowns at a T7, T6 at an absolute bare minimum, but you need to at least try. Don't just use, cheap 50-point armor to try to make this build, or you're going to be waiting quite a while for anything to regenerate for you. For weapons, I've got 3 main options. I'm going to explain as I'm going over them how you can switch things up. Barrow Dyad has not made an appearance in any of my previous builds for good reason. So one of the reasons is we don't have all the catalyst options yet. So that's kind of a big factor here, which means I'm probably going to end up coming back to this weapon here once Act 3 drops and people have a chance to catch up with getting the catalyst, getting things in the nether done, completing various challenges. I won't even get into them right now. But one of the key things to this build is its intrinsic perk. This weapon generates blight as it deals damage. While not firing, blight depletes, and the magazine is gradually refilled. Reload the weapon to convert stored blight into blight seekers. For a primary ammo 720 RPM submachine gun, this thing does ridiculous damage. Now, it's not going to blow the doors off of anything, that you would ordinarily use for DPS. Machine guns, linear fusion rifles, trace rifles even. But those blight rounds that burrow into enemies do a ton of damage. So there is one specific way that you need to have this weapon in order for it to work the day you're seeing this build. And that is Taken Divergence. This weapon resonates with your choices. Blight generated increases the longer this weapon remains on target. Blighted seekers burrow into targets and explode. That second sentence there was given to us the very first time anyone put their hands on this weapon. However, I'm going to show you a clip real quick right here. And as you see, as you switch things up, it's going to change that Taken Divergence from hitting multiple targets generates, the blight, to just hitting targets and keeping your weapon focused on targets generates blight. If you have the weapons set to this style, it's going to work a lot better. Thereby, you won't need to hip fire your weapon as often into a crowd of enemies just to hopefully hit 3. It means you can keep going a little bit faster with it this way. And also means when you're in boss DPS mode, when you're firing at the boss and you only have the boss to fire at, you no longer lose the ability to generate the blight to increase the damage you can cause with this weapon while you're waiting for your other weapons to either reload from, Reconstruction or Envious Assassin or whatever. You can still use this in rotation for DPS. You're not, like I said, you're not going to blow the doors off as far as how much you can generate generate DPS with this weapon. But those taken rounds, they do hurt. So if you haven't played around with this weapon or you haven't switched it to this other version where you can generate the blight as it remains on targets, basically any target, doesn't matter what it is, do it. Use the little video that I just showed you. Go over to Eris's apartment, switch it over, and I'll take it into your favorite strike or whatever and see how it functions. Pair this with the fact that it is a strand weapon and you start picking up orbs of power. Suddenly this weapon doesn't seem that bad on paper. Again, we don't have anything more than the high impact reserves refit catalyst. So I'm going to have to end up coming back to this build, or at least back to this weapon in and of itself, later on in the season and possibly in future seasons, depending on what we get going forward. But make sure you follow the steps to getting, the catalyst unlocked. But if you don't have the catalyst unlocked, you're going to have to do a little bit of catch up to getting it to where I'm at right now. Next up on the list, I've got a fusion rifle in the energy slot. Iterative Loop is one of my favorite fusion rifles of all time. You can roll it with Vol Shot and Compulsive Reloader, thereby you get rapid kills with the Vol Shot, you reload, you can proc Vol Shot all over again, and you can do that endlessly. Add to that the Nanotech Tracer rockets, landing multiple hits turns your next shot into a homing micro rocket, and you have, for a rapid fire fusion rifle, you have a pretty decent backup DPS or champ stunning weapon. And that's what we're using this for, is its ability to stun unstoppable champs. Next up on the list, I've got Watchful Eye. The main focus for using Watchful Eye is its ability with the artifact to stun overload champs. Again, we're not taking a barrier stunning champ because of our ability to proc Radiant on our character through our abilities, either Lightning Surge or our Arcane Needle intrinsically. So this is your second weapon specific to stunning champions. Keep in mind, jolted targets do take additional damage, and the fact that I've got two arc weapons here in the energy and heavy mean that when I put my reserve mods on, which we'll get to in a second here in the armor, you're going to benefit from bonus ammo regenerated for both of these weapons whenever you pick up a brick that corresponds to either one. Because you're using an exotic for your primary ad clear and all that jazz, you're going to see bricks pop up more often than normal. As far as substitutes for the fusion rifle, now you can substitute this with, you can do it one of two ways. You can either change out both of these and go over to Void. When you go over to Void, there's a number of Void fusion rifles you can put on. There's a number of Void machine guns you can put on to still be able to stun overload champs. The reason I have these two here is because both of these, with their perks that I have selected, can generate bolt charge, which means when you're firing Barrow Dyad even more rapidly than these, you can still call down the lightning strikes once you have max stacks of bolt charge. It's also the reason that I have Storm Trance on my weapon. So as far as these go, you can switch this out for, you can switch it out for a barrier piercing if you want, but if you do that, you're going to have to drop one of your fragments. If you don't want to change anything up, you just want to switch elements, you can switch this out for a likely suspect. You can switch this out for virtually any fusion rifle that you like, legendary that also is Void, and still take advantage of other perks inside the artifact. Same goes for Watchful Eye. You can substitute this out for virtually anything that you want. You can substitute this out for linear fusion rifle if you want to stun unstoppables that way. And then with this one, you're going to have to put on something that can stun overloads, but there's not many options to choose from except for trace rifles. So if you want to put a trace rifle on in your energy slot, you're probably going to want to switch over to Void, simply because Lodestar is not available. You've already used your exotic. So just keep that in mind when you're deciding what two weapons here. Normally I have a bunch of options you can switch to, but I think, if you're watching this video, you kind of understand the thought process at this point. You understand that really the only thing left is to be able to take care of unstoppable champs at a minimum, and then overloads, because we have fixes for barrier piercing capabilities built into this. If you're just running general content, you're never going to see a champ, or you're really never going to see champs just in general wherever you're running. Put on whatever you want and pair it with the artifact, and then just use Barrow Dyad to build up your ammunition and just let these rip when it comes to the bosses. For your helmet, put on whatever general mod that you need. I recommend a heavy ammo finder, and then if you can, try to make this a minor mod so that you can put on arc siphon and strand siphon if you are running arc. If you are not running arc, then I recommend putting whatever matching siphon on that you do, whether you choose to run void or whatever. But make sure you always have the strand siphon on, because that's what you're rolling with in your primary slot. You can also, if you don't care about generating orbs with your other elemental weapons, you can put on hands-on, which is going to give you bonus super energy on melee kills, which will fit perfectly with this build because we're going to be spamming our melee all the time. All right, let's go over Necrotic Grip. Damaging a target with melee poisons them, dealing increased damage over time. Defeating a poisoned target spreads the condition. Provides a moderate benefit to the airborne effectiveness stat of all Weapons of Sorrow. Weapons of Sorrow include Necrochasm, Touch of Malice, Thorn, and Osteostrago. I'm not using any of them because I don't really care about their ability to do anything. They're also not going to benefit me if I'm using Prismatic, because I would have to put a Fragment on there to give me bonus Transcendence energy if I'm using a kinetic damage weapon by itself. But there's enough reasons to put on Barrow Dyad in place of any of those that makes this even better. So I don't really care about the airborne effectiveness of the weapons, and they don't give me any bonus damage to that anyways. So what I'm basically doing here is I'm throwing out my melee, whether that's the Arcane Needle or the Lightning Surge. If I use my Lightning Surge on a major enemy and the enemy doesn't die from it, it's going to be poisoned, and the poison is going to continue to tick damage down on that enemy as long as they are alive. Now, if it's an overload, you're not going to see that damage go down very fast, much less at all, since they regenerate their health over time. But for unstoppables and barriers and beefier yellow and red bars, depending on what activity you run, the Grasp of the Devourer really does make an impact, because any enemy that you kill after that is going to spread the condition to nearby enemies. So even though we're not using a known splash damage primary weapon, the fact that the poison is going to be in the enemies that we are shooting at is going to give us the ability to spread splash damage without having to use a splash damage weapon. So I know that was kind of a lot that I just threw at you. If you need to rewind, start the Gauntlets over so you can kind of reformulate what you're thinking about here, go ahead. Otherwise, let's get into these mods that we were adding in. Put in whatever general mod that you want. I recommend using a minor mod if you can. Now, if that's the difference between you going +10 in something that you want to do it in, and some being below the minimum threshold that I recommended, go ahead and put on the major mod and then take off one of these heavy-handeds. The reason we have 3 heavy-handeds is that we can use our melee every second to generate an orb of power. Generated orbs of power are going to give our strand weapons unraveling rounds. It's also going to give us stacks of bolt charge since we're running storm trance. If you don't have all 3 of these on and you drop one, you will only be able to spawn an orb of power every 5 seconds. Which doesn't really seem like that long to wait in generalized or maybe even basic Nightfall style content. But if you are running a GM and you are relying on your melee to be able to generate orbs of power, this is going to be a big thing. Or not only that, but relying on your melee to proc Radiant so that you can pierce that barrier champion bubble. These are going to be necessary so that you can get unraveling rounds on top of becoming Radiant already. For your chest armor, whatever general mod that you want, 2 damage resistance mods, and then match your reserves to your energy slot and your heavy weapon. For the leg armor, I recommend Invigoration ×2 and Absolution. The reason I want Invigoration ×2 is I want my melee to come back just a little bit quicker than normal, but I don't want to neglect the rest of my abilities, so that's why I have Absolution. Use whatever general mod that you want, because if you build it like this, you're going to have plenty of room up here to put whatever you need on. Last but not least is the Warlock Bond. Put on whatever general mod that you need. Font of Restoration, of course, so you can get your class ability back as fast as possible, so you can cure yourself at any given time in the heat of battle. Put on Outreach to reduce your melee cooldown after you hit that, and then put on Reaper so that your next weapon Final Blow spawns an Orb of Power after you use your Phoenix Dive. You could also make the argument of using Powerful Attraction, but I think the way that I have it set here, unless you really don't care about your class ability, is probably going to be best for this setup. For the artifact, what you see on the screen is based on what I have selected in my weapon slots. So if you end up switching to Void, you're going to have to switch this up to match that. The main ones that you're going to want is these three right here. This allows you to be able to switch out with Barrow Dyad to barrier piercing capabilities, unstoppable piercing capabilities, and of course overloads. If you want to switch out your unstoppable fusion for a trace rifle, you will have to figure out what you want to do about your overload machine guns. That's why I have it set up like this. So with that in mind, let's go down the line and we'll go through the rest of this. Overclock and load, when you're amplified, which you will be often, and have bolt charge often, you'll get increased reload speed. Unraveling orbs, picking up an orb of power or a tangle grants strand weapons unraveling rounds. That means you can pierce barriers with your Barrow Dyad. Hold the line while surrounding machine guns and glaives can increase reload speed and stability. Final blows heal you. Yet another reason why I have a machine gun and its arc. Dielectric, defeating arc to buff targets grants bolt charge, vol shot, and jolting feedback count. Elemental Siphon, rapid final blows with a kinetic weapon or a weapon matching your equipped super. Create an elemental pickup that matches your equipped super. So in this instance, since we're running Storm Trance, that's going to give us Ionic Traces. Ionic Traces give us ability energy back spread evenly between our abilities. So this is one of those ones where it may not be absolutely necessary that you put this on to have a good time with this. Certainly you could put some other options on, like, special finisher or whatever. But Elemental Siphon will help you get all of your abilities back faster, since you're probably going to be using your Vol Shot and your Jolting Feedback weapons to your advantage when things get particularly hairy in front of you. In the next column, I got Flashover and Horde Shuttle. Damaging unraveled targets with a weapon occasionally spawns a Threadling, and when you gain maximum bolt charge, you also become amplified. Lightning bolts deal more damage. These two are no-brainers since we're running Arc and Strand. And then in the final column, dealing sustained damage to targets with a heavy machine gun or rocket launcher grants damage resistance and increases grenade and melee regeneration for a short duration. And of course, particle reconstruction, because I'm running a fusion rifle. Dealing sustained damage from fusion rifles or linear fusion rifles partially refills the magazine from reserves and grants them bonus damage for a short duration against the target. This effectively makes your iterative loop, or whatever fusion rifle you got, a mini DPS type style weapon. Now, you're not unloading 20 to 30 rounds, but I once shot about 13 rounds at a target. I have not duplicated that since, so I don't think that is something you can rely on. But for a weapon that only maximum holds, 6, 7, 8 rounds, that's pretty darn good and makes it even more fun to use in a DPS rotation. I want my grenade and melee energy to be coming back to me as fast as possible, so heavy ordnance regeneration makes the most sense. Defibrillating Blast, which is a staple in a lot of my builds, does not make the cut here simply because I've got so many other things that are going to give me stacks of bolt charge in the first place. If I'm literally waiting to see a champ before I can get my max stacks of bolt charge, let's be honest, I have some other problems. So you don't need this in this instance because you've got a number of things that are going to help you get that already built into this build. So that is the build. There's going to be, without a doubt, some debate on whether or not this can handle endgame activity. My first response to someone that asked me that question is, we don't have all the facts on Barrow Dyad yet. We don't know how it's going to pair with Act 3 perks. We don't know what the Act 3 perks are. We don't know what next season perks are for the artifacts. So there's some unanswered questions that really, focus on, is Barrow Dyad going to be a weapon that people are going to think of when they think of endgame activities first? There's certainly a lot of weapons out there that people are like, oh, I'm going into a GM. All right, it's going to be this, or this. Barrow Dyad hasn't made that cut yet, but that doesn't mean it won't. And there are certain situations where I could see this weapon being used with various characters and builds that would make this a meta weapon. But unfortunately, we just don't have all the facts yet. We've got a whole row of artifact perks that haven't dropped yet, and we don't even have all the catalysts yet for Barrow Dyad, so you can't even build into those even. The rest of these weapons are weapons that you theoretically could take into an endgame activity. Certainly Iterative Loop is a fan favorite from those that really were happy when we were getting Strand and we were doing, the Root of Nightmares and all that stuff. Iterative Loop was one of the first weapons that was picked when you were going through that campaign. And then Watchful Eye is an endgame style weapon as well. The jolting feedback and the overflow. I mean, what's not to love about either of those? Necrotic Grip, I will admit, doesn't feel like it hits as hard as when it first came out. And that's probably the same for that as it is for virtually everything that's gotten a rework over the last year or two. But it doesn't mean that Necrotic Grip can't help you wear down enemies. If you are solo and you're taking cover, but you've got a melee dropped in an enemy, it's still going to take damage over time. So theoretically, with a little patience, you could still use this in an endgame activity simply by itself, regardless of the other enemies. What really makes this boom is the Lightning Surge that you pair with it, because Lightning Surge is arguably more powerful than it's ever been thanks to Bolt Charge. So that's where people are going to kind of say, well, I don't know if this is really what I'm looking for. Is this really an endgame build? Again, you're going to have to make the decision, and different players are going to have different loves for the weapons that I just mentioned. You can certainly substitute virtually any kind of weapons that you want outside of Barrow Dyad, but then you're going to have to negotiate other fragments, which are in here specifically to counter for the fact that, at least right now, Barrow Dyad does not pierce barriers, or stun unstoppables, or suspend anything, or stun overloads, etc., etc., etc. The reasons are endless. But if you're looking for a way to pair Barrow Dyad with an exotic and also be able to double up on the fact that it's got those Blight Seekers that generate huge amounts of damage, throwing your melee into a boss and then using this in a boss rotation to get a couple of Blight Seekers in, or a mini boss even, which is what I really like using this thing for, it feels pretty darn good. And even in damage testing against, actual dungeon bosses, compared to other weapons in this slot, it's still in the higher end of damage that's able to be generated by the weapon by itself. So when you pair this with its ability to generate, unraveling rounds, when you pick up an Orb of Power, possibly, generate Threadlings, and who knows what else is going to come in Act 3, suddenly Barrow Dyad doesn't really seem like that bad of a weapon. Now, going forward, who knows? So feel free to debate me in the comments. I'm not going to put my stamp on this as a pure endgame build, although there are elements of this that I certainly like in endgame, but you guys are going to have to be the judge on whether or not you like it. Certainly Necrotic Grip, its main draw to it over, using Solipsism is the fact that it continually increases the damage tick over time, versus Solipsism, where it's just, it poisons the target and the poison spreads once the target is killed. But you could make the argument putting Necrotic and Synthoceps, together on your class item might be more appealing than this, since we are using melee a lot. But either way, once you get one of these or the other proc, whether that's all 3 melee charges, Transcendence, or your super, Once you use Transcendence or your super, theoretically, you should be alternating between the two almost interchangeably when one ends or the other. And no, I'm not even joking. That's literally how it goes, especially in a busier activity. So if you did find anything helpful in this video, if I didn't completely confuse you with all the terminology I use and the rapid fire opinions, if you will, and, you know, theories, please consider liking and subscribing. If you know a Warlock out there who is wondering, hey, is there a way that I can pair this new exotic submachine gun with any armor that I've got here? You know, send them my way, share this video with them. My goal is to try to help as many people as possible. Barrow Dyad is by no means a weapon that is terrible. I really like using it. As you'll see here in the footage coming up, I mean, it puts out insane power for it being a 720 SMG. Of course, you know, as always, I'll make sure to have a dim link in the description. For the energy and the heavy weapons, though, you guys are going to have to decide what element you want to spec into more, arc or void. And as always, I'll have my Discord link in the description in case you want to get with me on the side. You know, hey, Durf, I'm thinking about pairing this and this together with this weapon. What do you think? I went through a bunch of different weapons pairing up with this exotic SMG, as well as a couple of exotic armors, if that's something you guys want to discuss with me outside of the comment thread here on YouTube. Either way, you know, I just want to try to get people to try this gun because it is very slept on. And if you haven't gone through the steps to getting this weapon, I think there's a chance this weapon could be meta in the future, but I'm not quite at that point to say, yes, this weapon's going to cross anyone's path as a meta weapon right now, simply because we don't have all the artifact perks and we don't have all the catalyst options, and we don't know how it's going to function as an SMG in the future. So I'm going to put on the next little highlight video, talk you guys through some things that you see on the screen. But again, hopefully you guys find a little bit of help with this build. You can find a reason to put that Barrow Dyad on and at least give it a shot and pair it with this necrotic grip, you know, so you can get some bonus tick damage on top of bonus tick damage. And you guys have a little bit of fun with it going forward. All right, I'm going to switch over right now.
A few moments later.
So it wouldn't be a build demonstration if I didn't show you how Transcendence functions in this build. Because we're heavily relying on our melee to get our super energy back, popping Transcendence and then rapid firing your Lightning Surge is going to generate Orbs of Power on top of Orbs of Power. Because we're using a roaming super, you're generating an amazing amount of super energy, which you can't even see on the screen because I procced it so quickly from encounters before this one. Now let's look at the overall damage by Barrow Dyad by itself. You can see the many thousands that are being generated on this enemy simply by just firing it. It's not even debuffed yet. You saw my ally do a thunder crash into the boss there at the end, but I mean, without factoring anything else into the build, this thing is like putting in work comparatively. Is it doing, you know, endgame type weapons styles worth of damage? No, but is this any slouch? I mean, I don't think it is. Even in remote testing, you can tell that this weapon does an obscene amount of damage on dungeon bosses and raid bosses if you want to go so far to test it. But by itself, in an activity like this, you pair it with some of the other things we got, it's going to stand up and hold up on its own. Of course, it wouldn't be a complete test until we get to the boss room. This boss room is certainly sweaty for some people, sweatier for others, no doubt. And of course, there's always those really good guardians out there that make this easy work. This wasn't exactly one of those runs, but let's check it out. So I cast my super, get the jolt flowing. And as you can see, my allies are just adding tick damage on top of the damage that I'm doing. Once I get done with this, though, you're going to notice that I've got a full Transcendence bar. Of course, I didn't proc it right away, but here we go. I'm going to do that here in a second. I'm going to get a Poison Strike in there, a couple of Poison Strikes in there, and then I'm going to proc my Transcendence and just go, go, go. For the amount of damage that these taken rounds do, this weapon's going to hold up. So Anyways, that is pretty much the entire demonstration. You guys get the rest. If you did find anything helpful in this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Hopefully this helps a Guardian out there enjoy the game more. That is my goal. But I will see you guys next time. Thank you for checking out the video and all your good vibes this year so far. Take care.